Hello and welcome to Political Capital, the intersection of money and politics. I am Karabole Tlatla. It's been a hell of a week with the unraveling of VBS Mutual Bank saga and all that it implicates, including politicians. We'll be speaking to one of the leading economic minds in the country about it. But first, we go to a story that will leave chills in the blood of anyone that respects human rights. Every year, more and more journalists are killed by authorities than die covering war. The disappearance of Jamal Khashoggi in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul has led to a diplomatic standoff over the people's right to know. One of the leading proponents of media freedom in Africa is Caxton Professor of Journalism at Wits University. Mr. Anthon Harber joins me now via Skype for more. Anthon, please just lay down the scene for us. How bad is it for journalists in 2018?
It's very bad, and I think we're worried about the number of journalists being killed. And although we've always had a number of journalists killed in their job, particularly worrying is the growing number of people deliberately murdered, assassinated for their work, as opposed to, say, dying in a war situation or a conflict situation. And I don't think we've ever seen a case more brutal, more horrible than this one in the Saudi embassy in Turkey.
Prof, some might say we're looking at pictures coming in. I mean, it seemed that the Americans are taking this and taking their world place all over again. We saw the quick dispatching of Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to the Saudi kingdom to deal with the issue. But when you see pictures of Mike Pompeo, the king of the Saudi kingdom, and the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, smiling at what is no laughing matter, what do you make of that?
I'm very concerned by the American response. It wasn't fast enough. It's been equivocal. It hasn't been clear and condemnatory. The pictures, as you say, of the Secretary of State smiling with his counterpart in Saudi Arabia were really inappropriate. And Donald Trump's equivocal response, saying that he's not going to cut off trade and ruling out any really tough action, and saying before the evidence is in, seeming to clear the Saudi government of direct responsibility. This is most concerning. We have to fight the immunity that's existed for many years in the killing of journalists. And this is a key case in fighting it.
Prof, this leads me to my next question. Donald Trump has really hyped up his business relations in 2016 when he was on his way to the White House about how the Saudis will purchase $40–50 million worth of his properties. We also know that the Saudis have put in an order with the American military for about $110 billion worth of military hardware. When you think about those two things, do you get a sense that America is becoming a country of economic interests and less a country of values?
Certainly under Donald Trump, less a country dedicated to the traditional American values, or what we see as the traditional American values. And it's very concerning. I understand that the American authorities have a difficult diplomatic issue here. Saudi Arabia is a close ally, a big trading and investment partner, and it's very important to the balance of power in the region as a whole, and a close ally of America in that. But I don't think the way to do it is not to condemn and not to clearly and firmly condemn and take action. It doesn't mean that you're going to stop trading. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to stop investment, but you do have to be unequivocal and firm in condemning actions of this sort.
Prof, Donald Trump himself has made the media the enemy, and some say this is just part of his growth, part of the strong man politics that he seems to hold by the hand and embrace. And one thinks about people who have very little regard for media and for media freedom and journalists' right to ask questions. People like Vladimir Putin, for instance, people like Kim Jong-un of North Korea, and people like Erdogan himself, who this happens on his watch. And I get a sense that there is a bit of political meddling about taking the Saudis to task. Of course, we know that Turkey it doesn't exactly have a cozy relationship with the Saudi, but is this how journalism is going to be in the age of strongman politics, if you will?
It's a very good question, because I think one has to be concerned about preserving media freedom and the work of journalists under this kind of pressure and under this kind of attack. Donald Trump is an enemy of a free and active and critical media. He's made no bones about that. He's gone against deeply rooted, long-standing American traditions of openness, of respecting criticism, of respecting the media, even if you don't like them, and of protecting journalists around the world, and protecting when they are under attack, particularly those with links to American journalism and American newspapers. So this is terribly concerning. It's a major step backwards in trying to stop this kind of action and stopping the level of impunity people have had for acting against journalists until now.
As the saga continues to grow and really capture the attention of the world, we're hearing more and more business leaders, government leaders coming out to condemn what they possibly is alleged to have happened in the Saudi consulate. But we are also hearing business leaders saying that they will not be attending the investment conference that the Saudis have lined up, that's been dubbed the Davos of the desert. But doesn't money ultimately win at the end?
Well, maybe it does, but one hopes that along the way, certain values and principles can remain in place. And let me say, I don't think there's a contradiction between investment and making money and protecting journalists. In my view, a country prospers best with an open and free media, one that respects journalists, one that doesn't take action of the sort. So I don't believe it's in contradiction. I think that wise and far-sighted business leaders see that if they want to do business with Saudi Arabia, they can't have this kind of activity because it's bad for business.
Prof, while we are staying on the money, we heard this year in July, President Cyril Ramaphosa coming back saying that he signed a memorandum of understanding for about $10 billion worth of investments in various sectors with the Saudi government. Do you think that's the reason why we found that timid statement from the Department of International Relations and Cooperation yesterday? I mean, it really did not go anywhere at all.
One must suspect that the softness, the timidity, the slowness of the South African response was because of a fear of upsetting those relationships and those investment possibilities. But I think it's a very serious mistake. At the very least, you have to condemn. It doesn't mean you undo business relationships and long-term relationships, but it does mean you have to signal that you only do it on acceptable terms and within the values that our society stands for.
Professor, you and I are speaking right now. We're still not at the bottom of what happened to Jamal Khashoggi and whether or not really, or rather how complicit the Saudi government may be in this regard. But some say that all this time they have been trying to buy time to come up with a plausible story about what happened inside the consulate. What plausible story do they come up with now that will work with the facts that are already out there?
Well, clearly they can't find a plausible story, and they're having trouble dealing with the evidence. It's quite shocking how brutal and horrible and gruesome this appears to have been. I think that what they're likely to do is try and distance the leadership from what happened in the embassy and indicate that it was unauthorized rogue activity. But, you know, it's happened in the embassy. So I think they will have a hard time convincing the world that this was not done with official sanction.
The Kingdom of the Saudi government ultimately is an economic powerhouse, Prof. And some say because of their geostrategic positioning with regards to the Middle East, their cooperation with America, the investments between the two countries, that ultimately we could be in for a slap on the wrist about the life of a journalist killed so publicly at an international diplomatic area. Is that what you're expecting ultimately? Do you think there'll be a slap on the wrist and we all have to swallow it and move on?
I'm very concerned that we can't rely on President Trump in particular to deal with this with the seriousness and severity that it demands. But my hope is that pressure from the American people, pressure from Congress, pressure from leaders around the world will force his hand. And so I think it's very important that journalists around the world, human rights supporters around the world, leaders in communities make absolutely clear their anger and their frustration at the way the Americans are handling it.
Prof, I thank you for your time and for being part of this discussion. Thanks to Caxton, Professor of Journalism at Wits University, Mr. Anthon Harber. When we return, denials, blames, political interference and the looting of nearly 2 billion rands from VBS Mutual Bank. We'll tell you why you should not be holding your breath for successful prosecutions when we return.